Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it is Tuesday, July the 1st, 2025. 3 days to that great American celebration of freedom, Independence Day. And who better to talk about American Independence Day than my guest today, Connor Boyack. He's the president of Libertas Network. He claims to know a thing or two about liberty. He's also the author of the best-selling children's book series, The Tuttle Twins, and there's a new Tuttle Twins book out, perhaps to celebrate this July 4th, The World's Worst Ideas. I was going to call him Tuttle, but of course he's Connor. Connor is joining us from just south of Salt Lake City. Connor, what are you going to be doing on July 4th?
Well, actually, Independence Day in America is really July 2nd. This is something that not a lot of people know. John Adams, when he wrote, hey, we're going to celebrate independence every year, it was July 2nd. That was the year they actually voted on and agreed to the Declaration of Independence. So I like to celebrate Independence Day a little bit early before everybody else. But we'll be doing your typical family barbecue, hanging out with friends in the neighborhood. I'm sure there will be fireworks. Your prototypical American celebration to ring in a new year of supposed independence anyways.
You sound a little skeptical. Suppose it?
I am indeed. I'm quite libertarian, and everywhere I look, there's a lot of reasons to think we're not independent. We threw off the shackles of Britain so long ago, and if those same patriots and founding fathers who were part of constructing a new country could see all the heavy programs and taxes and all the things now, I think they'd have a thing or two to say about it. So grateful for the freedoms we do have, especially in contrast to some other countries. But from my perspective, we got a little more work to do if we want to reclaim that freedom that America once had.
Connor, I've been included, I think, on the Libertarian radar because I was going to go to Freedom Fest a couple of weeks ago in Palm Springs. In the end, I didn't end up going, but I did talk to some Freedom Fest attendees. Were you there?
I was not there. I've been to Freedom Fest every year for 10, 11 years. I did not go this year, though.
So what exactly does libertarianism mean to you? Why do you commit your life, whether it's the Libertas Network or the Tuttle Twins or Tuttle TV? Why are you so committed to what you call libertarianism? What does it mean?
What it means to me is the ability to be free to do as you please, provided you do no harm to others. To not have your stuff taken, to not have your body and your mind controlled. What I find is everyone is libertarian, at least on a few issues. Everyone's got a few pet issues where they just want to be left alone. They want government totally out of their lives. In fact, with our policy work, so I run a think tank called Libertas Institute. And in that side of my world, on the policy side, what you find is that a lot of our policy proposals are very bipartisan. Republicans will find reasons to agree with what we're working on. Democrats will find reasons to agree. Clearly, the two major parties and ideologies in America have a lot of clash. But libertarians are this weird group in the middle where sometimes we agree with people on the left, sometimes we agree with people on the right. We find that each major group is fairly libertarian on some issues, but not all issues. So for me, I just want people to be free. I think government, while it can do some perceived positive things, it's always at the expense of other people's rights, taking their belongings through taxation, controlling them through regulation and force. I think government has been an engine of destruction throughout world history, concentrated power that oppresses people who don't have the ability to defend themselves or to defend their property. And so I want people to be free. I want them to have their pursuit of happiness. And for that reason, I want to help them maximize their freedom, whether by changing laws to get government out of the way, or through educational initiatives like our Tuttle Twins and other work, where we can help them understand these ideas and then hopefully put them into practice in their lives.
So we'll get to the Tuttle Twins in a second, but we've done some shows, as I said, with the Freedom Fest folks. All very polite and interesting, although I have to admit I'm not particularly in agreement on some of their ideas, particularly when it comes to government and taxation. One of the issues we brought up was roads. One of the people I spoke to from Freedom Fest, in fact, the CEO of the Freedom Fest event.
Mark Skelson?
No, his daughter, Mark's daughter, but Mark has also been on the show, suggests that we should pay tolls on roads, that if we want to use roads or any kind of public service, we should all pay for it, but we shouldn't be taxed on it. Is that for you what libertarianism is, the choice to participate or not in any kind of public service or product? So you're essentially doing away with the principle of the public realm?
You'll find me to be what's the right way to say this? Perhaps a polite libertarian evangelist. And what I mean by that is, in the libertarian community, there's plenty of strident hardliners who are willing to go to the mat. I'm perhaps because I write kids' books and I try to be very appealing to people and inviting, I try and focus on areas of common ground. And for this question with the roads, it's kind of the stereotypical libertarian question: who will build the roads if we don't have collective taxes? I like to say that if we shrunk the government and got the government out of our lives to the degree that now all we're worried about is road funding, I'll retire. Because that means we've stopped the drug war, we've stopped civil asset forfeiture, which is police taking people's property, right? We're no longer making people pay rent to the county forever through property taxes for a home they already bought. So I like to focus on the issues where I can have a lot of common ground with people. We can philosophize all day long and talk about road funding. The short answer is yes, I do agree with the toll approach, or even the gas tax, in part because that is more of a user fee. I am driving this much on the roads, I am making this much of an impact, therefore I'm offsetting that use through this portion of the payment. The problem from my vantage point with taxation collective programs is that when you don't have the ability to quantify how much someone is using the system, and therefore you're getting into wealth redistribution, you're taking from the haves to give to the have-nots. And I think when you look throughout history, ultimately that causes more problems than it purports to resolve. So I do like the user fee model because, sure, government can provide certain services, whether that's garbage collection or whatever, but let's all pay commensurate with the actual benefit that we're getting.
I take your point, Connor, in terms of getting into the weeds on this, although you brought up security. Always seems to me that the police is the best example. Maybe the police aren't always ideal, but the police as a public good. What's your libertarian take on that? Should we have to pay every time we call the police if our house is being robbed?
These are fun questions. Okay, so short answer.
I mean, they are serious in the sense that hardcore
sure.
libertarians would probably suggest that there shouldn't even be a formal public police force.
Sure. So, certainly there are ways to address this without punitive taxation. You look at something like HOAs, especially in wealthier communities where they want increased security. So they have banded together, contributed voluntarily by buying into this community. They pool their funds and they hire private security because they know that police, when you have this collective responsibility for a community, it can be very inefficient. When seconds count, police are only minutes away, right? And so some people recognize, well, yeah, we like the concept of security and protection, but doing it through the government creates a lot of inefficiencies. In fact, one of my chief problems with the current structure of how we do policing is that the Supreme Court has consistently ruled that when an individual fails to receive protection from police, there have been a number of cases where maybe a cop will show up, will hear the aggressor inside someone's home, raping someone, killing someone, and for whatever reason, that cop does not enter to try to deter or thwart the crime. And so then that the victim's family sues, tries to hold the cops accountable, and consistently the courts have concluded that police have only a collective responsibility for security, but that they do not have an individual obligation to protect any one individual. So the very people who need the service the most have no right to claim the services of that police officer should the officer, through incompetence or fear or whatever, fail to render assistance. So the concept of security is great. It's the basic right that I have to protect myself. Therefore, I should be able to delegate that right to someone else on my behalf, whether a security guard or a police officer. I just think there's ways to improve it so that we get better outcomes, and we can actually increase security. Right now, I think there's a lot of inefficiencies in how the current model is set up.
Inefficiencies, it sounds to me like a word that comes out of Silicon Valley. You talked earlier about, and I know you were born in San Jose, so maybe that language comes slightly naturally to you. You talked earlier about being opposed to wealth redistribution, but isn't one of the problems, Connor, of libertarianism in practice is that wealthy Silicon Valley libertarians can afford their homes in the middle of the countryside. They can afford private security guards and private water and electricity. And the ultimate consequence of the disappearance of the private realm is actually compounding inequality.
Well, I would argue to the contrary in the sense that the poorest among us live better than the kings did a century ago, that the accumulation of wealth and the incentive for individuals to start businesses in the hopes of becoming part of the private elite, they only attain that really through, other than inheritance and cases like that, for the people trying to build wealth and attain that level of society, they do it through value creation. They do it through improving people's lives. The poor today have, often Netflix subscriptions and cell phones and refrigeration and indoor plumbing and all these things that were foreign even to the wealthy elite of the world, a century ago or whatever. So I do see capitalism writ large, or the free market, as an engine of innovation. And that has substantial trickle-down benefits to people even at the lowest rungs of society, who can now afford same-day delivery from Amazon. Sure, Jeff Bezos is spending $50 million on a lavish wedding in Venice or whatever, and more
I'm
power
sure it's
to
more
it.
than 50 million. That's just probably for the hors d'oeuvres. God knows.
It might just be.
That's just for his sunglasses and his facelift.
And so, look, someone like that, the money he's spending, it's going to productive purposes. It's employing people for the various companies that he's hiring for various products and services. But again, he attained that wealth by making my life better. I'm just an average guy. I don't have any wealth, but now I live like a wealthy person. I had to order stain for some wood furniture just an hour ago. And I was lamenting the fact that I'd have to go to the store and, go out of my way, take time away from the family. And they had free shipping, right? And that's what folks like Amazon have really innovated and pioneered. It enriches my life. He's created value for me. So I think that's a net positive of our society, that the ability for individuals to accumulate wealth and the incentive to try and build wealth comes at proportional with the value that they're creating for people in society, not just for their wealthy elite buddies, but in fact the people at the lowest rungs of society, whose lives I think are all improved as well.
Are you suggesting then, Connor, that you can't be poor in America today? I'm in San Francisco, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of homeless people on the street, and many of them do indeed have cell phones. So when you walk around San Francisco, you see people lying in the street as addicted to their cell phones as people in their own homes. Can one be poor in America in 2025, July 4th, 2025?
It's a provocative question. I think certainly the answer is yes. There's a lot of factors here with mental illness and otherwise that the homeless population especially struggle with. But there's robust infrastructure. There's many charitable organizations. There's certainly a proliferation of welfare programs for the people who want a leg up and want assistance, whether through religious charities, fraternal organizations, government welfare. I think it is, either an intentional act or a byproduct of someone's lower agency because of addiction or mental illness, where they're just not able to get out of that rut and avail themselves of the opportunities that exist. But I think there are a substantial number of support systems available that are poor. And how great that is that wealthy people who created value through their businesses have now amassed capital sufficient to donate to homeless shelters, to donate to the food bank, to do these types of things. So I'm bullish on society. I see these as positive things. They're not without their problems. The tech bros in Silicon Valley are not saints. We do have issues to deal with, but I think more than any other economic system in world history, capitalism has provided the most upside for the most people with the least downside ever.
You're talking to me from Utah, the state perhaps where there are some saints, or at least some people believe there's such a thing as saints. For people who are just listening, Connor has a carefully manicured beard, but nonetheless a beard. Again, Connor, you don't need to tell me, you don't need me to tell you this, but there are really hardcore libertarians who have probably done your movement a disservice. They resist government. Some have been involved in standoffs, violent standoffs with the state, particularly in Utah and other non-industrial or other less industrialized states. Does one have the right, in your view, to resist government?
Our country, we're talking on, around Independence Day, was formed by people who vehemently thought that the answer was yes. The Declaration of Independence itself that says that, not for light causes should people do so, but that when remedies fail and there's no other opportunity to solve the problem, then they have the right to abolish the form of government to which they're accustomed and substitute it for new ones. You had the Constitution that came later. The states that decided to accede to the Constitution or agree to that new form of government seceded from the prior form of government under the Articles of Confederation, which they called a perpetual union, never to be, abolished. And here they were abolishing that government to create a new one. I think there are a number of reasons to amend and improve the Constitution, to reform government further. Does that mean that we should sanction violence against state actors? That certainly comes with costs, as it did for, the Patriots during the founding era. They were basically shooting at military officers and cops. We call them redcoats, but it was the military and law enforcement officials for the British government. Am I ever going to suggest that we ought to replicate or emulate that? No. However, should circumstances ever devolve such under our government that tyranny is much stronger, I think there would be an element of justification in certain contexts, in certain circumstances. There's certainly precedent in our country. But of course, the choice to use violence comes with the consequence of making that choice. And for many individuals, if you were to stand up to the most powerful government in the world, that is not going to go well for you. And so a lot of folks I know who are very disillusioned with the government will choose to become expats and move elsewhere in search of, greater freedom, or try to minimize their tax burden as much as they can and so forth. Fortunately, we don't really see calls for violence. I think they're anomalous to the extent they happen. They're certainly not relegated only to people with libertarian sentiments. In fact, when you look at all the mass shootings and things, these are people who, number one, are often doped on SSRIs and psychotropic medication, but many of them come from the left, and they've been very agitated and disgruntled. So this is not something exclusive to one community. I think there's always diplomatic ways to resolve things, just as with Iran and Israel and all of the provocation of recent days. There's always opportunity for diplomacy and persuasion and peace over violence, I think.
And as we celebrate on July 4th, or as you said, you may be celebrating tomorrow, July 2nd, are there particular founders that we should celebrate? I mean, Jefferson, of course, comes to mind, who argued that the tree of liberty needs to be I don't know, rejuvenated or watered with the blood of patriots? When it comes to the founding fathers, are you particularly wedded to Jefferson?
Jefferson, I think I look up to in a lot of respects. These were not perfect people. They certainly weren't so problematic that we need to be tearing down their statues and renaming institutions after which they're named. Right? These people did have warts. They did have problems. They grew up in a socio-political environment that had certain assumptions and laws and customs that some of which we've repudiated since. We don't need them to be perfect to, I think, learn from them, take the good. We can build upon that good. So yeah, I think there's a lot to praise about Jefferson. There's a lot to praise about George Washington and relinquishing power. His farewell address is one of the most powerful statements ever made, certainly by the leader of a nation, warning about entangling alliances, warning, about the spirit of partisanship and the destructive nature that comes. He was seeing it in his own cabinet between the likes of Jefferson and Hamilton, who was much more of a centralizing force and a nationalist. So even from someone like Hamilton, who I don't really have much affinity with, there's some amazing things to learn. So my role, especially with the Tuttle twins, is to try and help kids who are learning history extract from these people's lives the positive things that we can learn. What did they do well? Let's also learn some of the things that we may disagree with, but let's praise what was positive. Let's emulate that. Let's figure out what that might look like in our day. So certainly with Jefferson, there's plenty. So too with Madison and Adams and Washington and all the rest.
Well, let's get to the Tuttle twins. We've talked libertarianism. As I said at the beginning, you're the author, I think, of 50 books, including the best-selling Tuttle twins, sold millions. Some people might be watching this, Connor, and I'm sure you get this reaction all the time, and thinking to themselves, Connor can write for adults, but why write for children? Aren't children a little too innocent? With the Tuttle twins, are you trying to convert them? Is it a form of libertarian propaganda, perhaps?
I love the question. The answer, admittedly, is yes. Tuttle twins, quote me now, is libertarian propaganda. And I use that word intentionally because what is propaganda? Propaganda is just propagating an idea from one person's mind to another. It is persuasion. It is education. Everything is propaganda. Your podcast is propaganda. My podcast is propaganda. I think we need to propagate more ideas. I think we need more conversation in society. And so the reality is that kids, through schools, through social media, traditional media, peers, and otherwise, are being exposed to all kinds of ideas, worldviews, perspectives, assumptions, biases. So why wouldn't parents want to help their children understand what they believe? Parents often do this in a religious context. They'll take their children to, say, Sunday school or illustrated Bible, or other religions have similar things for their children as well. But many parents fail to do the same when it comes to economic and political ideas and truths that those parents value and prize. So our books are simply a resource to help parents introduce their kids to some of these concepts, discuss them together, and talk about how does the world work? How do we feel about this idea? What does this look like for us as a family? So we're about educating the whole family. 52% of the parents who get our books tell us that they are learning new things for the first time. So frankly, this is as much for mom and dad as it is for the kids. And what we're really wanting is to foster family discussion, whether at the dinner table, the grocery store, or in the car running errands. We want families talking about ideas that matter and not, just watching random media and fluffy stories. We want substantive ideas. Kids can understand it. Frankly, they love to learn these ideas. They feel smarter than most adults. They realize that they're learning things that a lot of adults don't even understand. So kids are very drawn to it. And so we're about educating the family. And yes, you can call it propaganda, but I would call textbooks propaganda, and Bluey and Phineas and Ferb and podcasts and all the rest. It's a competition of ideas, and we're simply trying to empower parents to share these types of ideas with their kids in a kid-friendly context.
So if everything's propaganda, all texts, all media, all movies, all podcasts, all radio shows, all people, I guess, is traditional children's literature then, in your view, propagandistic? Are the Tuttle twins your pushback against certain kinds of reading that kids have traditionally grown up with?
I'd say in certain respects, the answer is yes. Parents increasingly are very concerned about and cautious about traditional media programming for their children that have ideas slipped in there. You wouldn't think when you're watching, Peppa Pig or Pick Your Show on Nickelodeon or PBS Kids that they would be teaching any economic or political or social ideas to your kids other than the very, commonly acceptable things in polite society. And yet what many parents have discovered and object to is the introduction of ideological ideas in otherwise benign content. They feel lied to, they feel deceived, they feel undermined by these programs that are slipping these things in and presenting something different than what was understood to be provided in that show or other form of media. By contrast, we try and be and are very overt. No one can mistake what we're doing. This is not an exercise in sneakily slipping stuff into our cartoon or into our books. We are very upfront. You know what you're getting when you buy the Tuttle Twins books. Thus, again, providing parents the opportunity to make a conscious decision for their family. Yes, I like these ideas, or I want my kids being exposed to these and I want to talk to them about them. So I'm going to get the books that will do precisely that. So I think intentional propaganda, as we might call it, is totally fine because there's consent of both parties. I know what I'm getting. I know what type of media this is. I think what's problematic is the deceptive stuff where parents thought their children were being exposed to one thing, and then the purveyors of this content are sneaking in something else without parents really being on the up and up.
What about, though, Connor, the definition of childhood, the traditional definition, the liberal definition developed by some of the founding fathers, I guess, of American liberalism, like Locke, suggested that we're empty vessels and that we take on worldly experience and that shapes our minds. Aren't you picking on, but by presenting, as you say, your libertarian propaganda to children, aren't you taking advantage of their innocence?
Well, again, I see us as parents are our consumers. We're not going to children in the classroom and shutting the door with a captive audience and putting this stuff in their brain. We're not doing anything without parental knowledge and consent. It's the parents who are buying these books. That's a vote of affirmation that they want to talk to their children about these ideas, just as if they were to buy the illustrated Bible for kids on Amazon. Parents have the right to impart to their children the ideas that they espouse and believe in, whether religious or otherwise. And so these tools are simply empowering those parents who agree. Sometimes we'll get the response, and the beginning of your questions seem to be going in this direction of why not let kids be kids? They're empty vessels, but let them just develop slowly, have a childhood without all these adult ideas, and the response is that because of social media, I know you have concerns about technology and the industry, the way things are, for good or for bad, love it or hate it, the reality is that children are being increasingly exposed to a diverse range of ideas and attitudes and influencers and perspectives. And so we think that in that landscape where children are being heavily bombarded with different ideas, that parents ought to be that much more intentional about talking to their children about what they believe, not to put them in a bubble and try and shield them from contrary ideas, but instead to give them a sort of foundation about, hey, this is what your mother and I believe about these ideas, and here's what we think, and let's read a book about it. We're just trying to empower parents to be a little bit more intentional with full consent that they're the ones introducing these ideas to their children, rather than, again, going around the parents with sneaky programming or classroom instruction where parents are kept out of the loop. That is where parents feel frustrated and deceived. They feel undermined. We go through the front door while others are trying to sneak in the back door.
Wow, that sounds brave in a way, although I'm not sure everyone would necessarily agree. Wearing your Libertas Network cap, Connor, what's your take on, and you're in the middle of this, I know you've done a great deal of thinking about libraries and schools, both calls from the left and particularly the right to take certain books out of libraries, not allow kids to read books about supposedly woke subjects. Are you in favor of banning books that you don't particularly like, or that perhaps sometimes you even might like?
Well, part of the challenge here is, as a libertarian, I don't think government schools should exist, and I don't think that government-funded libraries should exist. I think if these were privatized, it would be left up to the owners of those institutions, of private schools or homeschools or private libraries and so forth, and bookstores, to do what they want. So I believe in freedom of choice. I believe in property rights, and let people sell and provide whatever books they want. So the problem here is that we are forcing taxpayers to be part of an institution whose actions they disagree with. So when it comes to this question of banning books, I certainly do not favor banning things that are classified broadly as woke. I think, again, more ideas, more information, more conversation is better. I do object to, and therefore I support banning books that are clearly pornographic, that are exposing children to all kinds of sexual activities and styles and behaviors that I think polling shows the vast majority of parents object to this. That is the inappropriate sexualization of children. So for that subset of ideas, I do think it's appropriate. And that's frankly where most of the consternation comes from, not from broader woke principles, but more from these sexually charged materials where the books will be in the library and then a parent will take it to the school board meeting and try to read a passage and they're shut down and the microphone is turned off. That itself should be a signal that why is it not okay to read in a public forum like that, but it's okay for our children to read. I should point out, we have been the victim of book bans. Just a couple months ago, there was an upstate library in upstate New York that excluded, they had the Tuttle Twins on the shelves.
No.
They were pretty popular books. They removed them. And their argument was that our books were insufficiently inclusive of different ideas, which was ironic because they had all kinds of leftist and progressive and Marxist books that were not inclusive of libertarian or conservative type ideas. And those books were on the shelves. Our community pushed back, the library relented, and the books are now restored to the shelves. But it cuts both ways. So I think we should have, as long as it's not like extremely objectively inappropriate things like sexualized material for children, if it's just different political and economic and civic and social ideas, I think the more exposure and the more conversation, the better. Let's just let the chips fall where they may, see what kids think as they grow up, and be competing in the marketplace of ideas.
I wonder, Connor, whether there's, and I'm sure you've heard this criticism before, I wonder whether one of the weaknesses or perhaps contradictions in your position is the role of parents. You keep on bringing up parents, the role of parents to introduce their kids to what you call propaganda, to shape them as they think fit. But what about the libertarian idea that children should be free of their parents, just as you seem to be suggesting that we all should be free of government and of the state? What's the big deal about parents? A lot of people have imagined utopians or sometimes dystopians, a world without the family, whether it's Thomas More's Utopia or Marx's work. Why should children be dependent on parents any more than they're dependent on police officers or government bureaucrats?
That is a very fun question. And I think the answer in part is that is the natural order of affairs in society. These children are the offspring of their parents. They rely upon them for their physical safety, for providing them with food and education. So the question ultimately in my mind becomes, since children are dependents, they are not self-sufficient. They are not yet adults, not in the sense of you're 18 and magically you're an adult. I think there's problems with how we treat adulthood legally with an arbitrary age, but in the ability to consent to things, to fully understand them, to have a developed mind, to be able to consent to legal agreements and personal relationships and all the rest. Clearly, children are dependent. So the question as a society is, upon whom are those children dependent? Who are the natural and responsible providers for children? Of course, collectivists throughout history have argued that it's the state, and they, whether in the Soviet Union or elsewhere, have expanded programs to deprioritize parenthood. This isn't relegated only to dystopian fiction, as you point out. There have been government programs throughout world history trying to undermine the natural role of the parents. It always ends in absolute disaster, in misery, and so I think we can clearly see just from observing these historical examples and just working from first principles about what parenthood and family relationships are like, that it makes sense. It is the natural order of things. Family is the natural governance structure, right? Libertarians sometimes get accused of being anti-government. I'm not anti-government at all. I'm very pro-government. I'm pro-family government. I'm pro-corporate government. I'm pro every form of government in which there are natural relationships based on voluntary interaction and mutual consent. Now, that certainly breaks down with children who can't consent, but it is a natural relationship. And so if not the parents, then who? I think of the quote from Michael Novak. I'm not going to get this exactly right, but he has this quote where he says, between totalitarianism on the one hand and the naked individual on the other looms the first line of resistance against totalitarianism, and that is the economic and politically independent family, protecting the space within which individuals may receive their necessary years of nurture. So I see the family and parents as the breeding ground of freedom, the natural form of governance. They themselves have willed this child into existence through their voluntary, consensual, sexual relationship. And so for me as a religious person, I think God has ordained the union of the family, and I think there's religious arguments. But even from a Lockean natural rights creator perspective, I don't know of any other institution and an individual or entity that is better positioned and more naturally positioned to successfully or even adequately care for children than the parents themselves.
There's a growing fashion, though, as I'm sure you know, in the US, for kids to divorce their parents, to separate them, to deny any association. Is there an age where children should be able to do that? What happens if they think to themselves, I don't want to read the Tuttles, this is insanity. I want to read Nabokov's Lolita instead. At what age do children acquire rights to actually disassociate themselves from their parents?
Well, apart from the kind of philosophical question, the practical example is that all across America, different states have different ages at which emancipation, as it's called, is legally possible. And there are different circumstances in which it can happen. Certainly if there's abuse and if there's neglect and things like that, that can be factored in. But if the child has other legitimate reasons or circumstances in which it makes sense, I think, you look 200 years ago as an example, rugged early pioneer America, you had 15, 17-year-olds who were not only getting married and starting families on their own, which is crazy to think of in today's social context, but providing for themselves, working the farm, doing hard work, contributing a lot of value already to their family and their community. And we live in a very infantilized society by contrast. The thought that my 16-year-old would emancipate himself and live as an adult and provide for himself is just insane, right? And so I think our children growing up, and even us decades ago growing up in this society, I think coddle children far more than past societies did, I think to the detriment of those children. So I don't know that there's an exact age. In fact, I don't think age is the proper way to do it. There's probably more a way to demonstrate your self-sufficiency, your ability to consent, whether that's, convincing a judge or demonstrating it economically. I haven't thought this all the way through, but I just have always objected to the idea that magically you're 18 and so off you go, you're an adult now. It makes sense from a very practical standpoint of just not having to work on an individual basis to say, are you an adult? And are you an adult? And have you passed the test? But it has its problems where people who are 18 are less mature than many people out there who are 15 and 16. So I think there might be a different way to handle this. The arbitrary age, in my mind, has its own problems.
So maybe, and best-selling books have been written on this, maybe the coddling of young Americans is one of the world's worst ideas. You have a new book, a Tuttle Twins Guide to the World's Worst Ideas. We can't cover them all, Connor, but tell me some other really bad ideas that you're addressing in this guide to the world's worst ideas.
I'll rattle off a few. One is neoconservatism, the idea of foreign interventionism and meddling in other people's affairs. Look at Iran. Everyone's freaking out about Iran, but Iran, the whole conflict started in 1953 when the CIA waged a coup along with the UK and overthrew the democratically elected leader that led to the hostage crisis in '79, which led to all of the destruction in the decades since. So neoconservatism, or this idea of foreign intervention, I think is a horrible idea.
Is that, I don't want to turn this into another foreign policy debate, but would that extend, for example, to the late 30s and the threat of the Nazis in the United States? There were American isolationists back then who didn't think it was any of America's business to get involved in fighting Nazism.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'll go back to Washington, right? There's always bad guys around the country. There's always dictators and despots and warring countries, world wars, right? Washington saw from personal experience the dangers that come from meddling in other people's affairs. That's not to say that concerned Americans couldn't go volunteer for, say, the UK's military and go contribute to the cause, but to forcibly conscript Americans, to require them to fund the war, things like that. Yes, you're right. Some, like you, call it isolationism. I call it more independence, maintaining neutrality. Certainly, if we are attacked without aggression, then I think that any country has the right to defend itself, just as any individual has the right to defend him or herself. But you look at these interventions, and they've just created a long stream of problems.
And I don't always talk about the Nazis, although in this case, it's hard not to. Let's say the Japanese hadn't invaded, hadn't launched their attack on Pearl Harbor. But let's also say that it was the knowledge of the death camps in Europe was unambiguous, certain. Should the Americans have still stayed out of the Second World War?
I think the answer is yes. Again, I think that the government's role could have been persuasion. Let's do funding campaigns. Let's voluntarily send provisions over to help. Let's rally people to come to the aid of...
I'm not sure provisions would have been very good if people were being killed in death camps in gas ovens.
Right, which is why I say individuals who want to go join the fight could have elected to do so voluntarily rather than forcibly conscripting people. There's always going to be an example like this. Something bad is happening. Look at what Saddam Hussein is doing, right? Or look in Yemen and Libya. We are given a parade of examples, some more egregious than others, of despots around the world. And that always becomes the excuse that, well, American is the policeman, and so we should go intervene, do sanctions, send troops, right? Support Ukraine to go fight Russia. It's just a constant state of meddling in other people's business. It creates destruction of millions of lives, displacement of tens of millions, the debasement of the currency because you're inflating the dollar so much by printing new money to afford all of this. I think Washington's words were wise. And despite there always being a reason to engage, there always being a bad guy to go fight, John Quincy Adams had a similar quote, right? We go not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. America is a champion of her own. We will defend ourselves if attacked, but we don't go all around the world. At least this was the foreign policy of yesteryear, to say that there's always world wars, there's always conflict, there's always bad guys killing people and doing horrible things. But we have to decide, is that our fight? Is America really the policeman of the world? I don't think it is, nor ought to be. And that's why it's one of the world's worst ideas, neoconservatism, because I think it comes with a parade of horribles and long-term consequences and destruction in the wake of these actions.
Well, not everyone would agree, but you're very forthright and clear, Connor. Give me another couple of examples of the world's worst ideas, controversial ones. I mean, some are self-evident.
Controversial. All right, I'll do, look, prohibition. I think there's common, there's general consensus that the alcohol prohibition of a century ago didn't work, but it's that same sentiment that fuels the drug war today, which of course has led to cartels. It's led to fentanyl. It's led to all of these problems where people are being harmed and dying. So it's no surprise to hear a libertarian say that we shouldn't have a war on drugs. I'm not a drug user. I don't evangelize using these substances. But if someone is doing so in the safety of their, living room and not getting behind a car and not exposing kids, then people.
Fentanyl, I mean, is a killer. I mean, so you're saying that people should be allowed to just take it, or psychedelics or anything else, even if it does terrible harm to them if they choose to?
Short answer is yes. I think people ought to be free to shoot themselves in the head or ingest bath salts or do whatever they want. People have autonomy over their own bodies. So sure, yes, I think people ought to be able to ingest the substances that they want. Now, the problem that I have with these examples is when we talk about fentanyl, it's like talking about the hard liquor with Al Capone, right? He was financially incentivized to increase the potency of the liquor that his guys were transporting, the bootleggers, because it was so dangerous. So that led to the increase of potency. Same thing with drugs. You look at whether it's cannabis, you look at fentanyl. If you go back and look at it, it's that the incentives for the cartels of today are such that they're going to want to make more money by creating more potent products. And that's because of the risks involved in it. If they're going to get caught or busted, they'd rather do so or risk getting caught by making a lot more money rather than having a lower potency, lower price type of product. So I think the potency would come down and the problems would dissolve, along with all the militarization of police and all the problems that are downstream of the drug war, including civil asset forfeiture, where people's property is being taken without being charged with a crime. There's all of these things that flow out of the drug war. And so prohibition is an example from the book where I mean,
from what you're saying, and you are an author of children's books, at some point, our lives will dramatically change if Connor, you ran the world, whether it's 16 or 18. You won't be, I mean, you said that you shouldn't be allowed to view pornography, presumably social media, the internet, certainly alcohol. But then you become 16 or 17 or 18 and you can do anything you want. Is that your argument?
Maybe. I'm not sure I fully tracked what you were saying.
You were in favor earlier of banning pornography, of not allowing children to look at pornography. Why is children's access to pornography any worse than children's access to alcohol or tobacco or social media?
Well, I was talking about it in the context of the pornography, about taxpayer-funded libraries and schools. I wasn't necessarily commenting on what people have in their own homes and what parents choose to have on the bookshelf. Now, do I morally object to a parent having pornography in the home where they're raising children? Absolutely. I think that's bad parenting. Do I think that's a reason for the state to intervene, to forcibly take the children out of the home, to otherwise punish the parent? Probably not. So if a parent's going to drink wine and let their kid have some sips or expose their children, certainly there's thresholds. If there's problems, then there becomes a justification for, child services and others to intervene. But I am not one to advocate that the government should go around banning all these things in the privacy of people's homes.
And finally, then, we've talked about what you call neoconservatism, prohibition. People should be allowed to take or drink or smoke anything they want. America has no obligation to be involved in any foreign wars in a moral sense. What's a final bad idea that you want to expose in your new book?
Well, the first chapter is government welfare. This is a provocative one, as you requested. Are there poor people who need help? Absolutely. But when you look at government welfare, even FDR has this amazing quote where he recognizes that welfare programs dampen the human spirit and it puts people on the dole and they have a hard time getting out of it. And here's the guy who was behind the programs that became the New Deal. I think government welfare, there's a great book by David Beto called From Mutual Aid to the Welfare State. And he chronicles the history of the welfare state, that in the decades prior, America had a large number of fraternal societies and religious charitable groups, private institutions, all caring for the poor. You didn't have people dying in the street. You didn't have people going without. You had all these overlapping social institutions that were looking out for one another, whether that was, hey, we're an Irish fraternal society and we care for all the Irish immigrants coming over, or you had religious groups that would provide orphan care and elderly care. You had church-owned hospitals that would provide free medical care, right? And what happened was, with the rise of the welfare state, it crowded out these private institutions. The incentives were misaligned. Of course, if I am donating to a fraternal society that helps the poor. Let's say I'm giving them $100 a month, but now I'm being taxed forcibly to fund the welfare state. Why am I going to do the double dip if I'm told that that $100 tax is going to fund the poor? The problem, of course, with the welfare state is you get a bunch of intermediaries, you get corruption, you get waste and inefficiency like you do with any government agency. But all of these private institutions shut down. They couldn't raise money anymore. It was difficult to compete against tax dollars and the welfare state. So I think while we all want to help the poor, government welfare programs are not at all an effective means of doing so. And we ought to extract the government from the equation, return money to people, and then persuade and encourage them to support private institutions and rebuild social fabric where we're caring for one another rather than just depending on the dole and the government handout, where you don't have giver and receiver connecting and creating that social fabric. It's just an impersonal bureaucratic transfer of resources that doesn't really help anybody that much.
Well, I can't resist. Finally, Connor, on this July 4th, well, it's July 1st now, but this week, what's your take on Trump? I know there's some ambivalence about him within the libertarian community. Last year, he spoke at Freedom Fest, but in my conversations with some of the Freedom Fest people, they articulated some ambivalence, some suspicion, some support. Is Donald Trump and his new administration, are they a friend or a foe of libertarians like yourself?
I would say the answer to your question, Andrew, is yes. Depending on the issue, there are good things to praise Trump about. I love that he freed Ross Ulbricht, right? He's doing some important good things as a proponent of Bitcoin. I love that
Ross Ulbricht, of course, was the CEO of Silk Route, a dark website, and was put in jail. But sorry, go on.
Yeah. So I think there's some good things that he's done. I think there's a lot of bad things that he's done. I come from a political world. We have a think tank. I work with politicians all the time. I don't see this as a binary. I'm not a Trump guy. I'm not an anti-Trump guy. I'm hopeful that he'll do more good things, and I really hope he'll do a lot less bad things. So the jury is out, but I want to cheer on Trump and everybody in office to do better things that better protect our freedom and try and work with them to do so while trying to minimize and mitigate the downside of which there is an abundance when we deal with politicians, especially the President of the United States.
Well, there you have it. The Tuttle twins will be celebrating, I'm sure, July 4th, maybe tomorrow, July 2nd as well. Congratulations, Connor Boyack, on your new book. In the series, the Tuttle Twins series, the world's worst ideas, the twins' guide to that. Happy Thanksgiving. No, not happy. Whoops, that was a Freudian error. Happy Libertarian Day, or Liberty Day, or Freedom Day, or Independence Day, Connor. And I appreciate your honesty. You've been very forthright. Thank you so much.
Well, libertarians would consider Independence Day our day of Thanksgiving for our freedom. So I'll take it. And I'll wish you a happy Independence Day as well. Thanks for having me on.